But less than a year ago, our beloved mayor, who many of you, I think, have met if you're not from Louisville, and of course all the Louisville people know him well, Greg Fisher, when he learned that the Dalai Lama would be coming to Louisville, said, look, we've got to make a big deal out of His Holiness's visit, because it is a very big deal that he's coming here. And he gathered a bunch of people around in a room, and he said, I have a few ideas, and I want you to listen up. And we all said, okay, because we love the guy so much. And he said, you guys over at the Center for Interfaith Relations, I want you to do a spring edition of the Festival of Faith in the days leading up to His Holiness's visit. That's a good idea, don't you think? We all kind of had these blank expressions on our face, but nodded, of course, and said, yes, that sounds like a very good idea. And then we scrambled in a wild way as soon as the meeting was over and said, can we really pull this off? Well, anyway, here we are. And the purpose really is, in our minds, and certainly, as the mayor said, was to not only make a big deal out of His Holiness's visit, but also to sort of prepare the ground here in Louisville for His Holiness's visit. And I can't think of a finer expression of the things that His Holiness is so constantly talking about than the group that we have to address us today. They are some of the most extraordinary and distinguished speakers, and I can say that because they've all been with us this week, and they have spoken to us this week, and they do not constitute our entire group of speakers who have, those that are not on the stage have also been extraordinary. All of these programs, by the way, are findable. We are incredibly proud to say on YouTube. And somewhere, we'll have that, all the details on where you can find that here later on. But in any case, that's really the story of how, yeah, there we are, right there. Ask no more than ask, and you get a big slide that tells you where to go. So just go there, and you can see everything that we've had in our program. Let me just also offer some thanks. We have only been able to put this on, of course, with an enormous amount of help from the city on lots of different levels, and including a few really specific groups and companies that have been just incredible partners and allies to us. And let me say that in addition to the mayor, his entire office and really the whole city of Louisville on the government side has just been completely supportive. Also Brown-Forman Corporation, the Archdiocese of Louisville, Louisville Public Media, the Earth and Spirit Center, Fons Vitae, Val Jones and the Whiskey Row Lofts, and Christy Brown for her ongoing and tireless support of this festival. Our staff, which has just been amazing, led by Dr. Kathleen Lyons, has grown in the days and weeks and months leading up to this festival, but at its core are two other people who later on, before we finish up, I'll make sure and bring forward so we can all applaud them with them before us. But now maybe we could just offer a brief thanks with heartfelt enthusiasm for Sarah Reed Harris, Chris Wooten, and Kathleen Lyons for making this all possible. Okay, so now, this is a very unusual program relative to the other ones we've had. There's lots of various moving parts, and blessedly, Rajiv, master of all things to do with moderation and beyond, of course, is going to help us. So he'll explain more of these moving parts himself, but just so you know, look to him and pay close attention so as to follow our program as it unfolds. Gray is now going to offer some words of introduction.
Good morning. This particular event you're attending today is actually the interfaith component requested by His Holiness the Dalai Lama for his visit to Louisville. That is why the wonderful scholars who are here with us today, who will speak about compassion and its source in the self and how we may abide in that true self. These scholars will be with His Holiness on stage, on stage, do you call it that? On stage, it seems odd. With the Dalai Lama tomorrow, each of them making a summary of what they say today. so that he is aware of what his interfaith component has done. And before we begin their session today, our blessed Arjia Rinpoche from Bloomington will do an introductory prayer. He is His Holiness's representative here in America. He is in charge of the Tibetan-Mongolian Center in Bloomington, and therefore, after Kathleen speaks a few words, he will really inaugurate and bless the opening of the interfaith component of His Holiness's visit. Thank you.
Well, things have to be adjusted down for me. So far in our Festival of Faiths on Sacred Silence, we have talked a great deal. And I suppose the most prominent subject has been happiness. Happiness, as has been defined at this festival, is a contentment that reaches deep down into our interior, to what is most admirable in our remarkable selves. This festival, I think, is one of a kind. It is our 18th Festival of Faiths, but we have not had another like it in our history. And I'm wondering, has there ever been a festival of faiths quite like the one that we have just had? Our leader for this remarkable Festival of Faiths is Owsley Brown III. Owsley, at the beginning of every single session, has thanked everyone in sight. Now that we've reached the climactic moment of the festival, it is time to thank Owsley. You can do better than that. Owsley has led us from the front, from behind, and from every side. We are so very, very grateful. And having said in our own feeble way, thank you for the enormity that is in our hearts. We'll continue with the festival that he has so ably led from the very beginning. Thank you, Owsley. And now, I think Arjia Rinpoche is to continue. Thank you.
Reme chulu kewang derzom tu Jichin Shapten Zamling Shishing Day Pame Tokjang Marjur Semchen Gun Drepung Chozok Samdun Thunrup Shaw. Beautiful and shining like the white moon, the sublime gift of compassion was given to me by my kind mother. Later, as I grew older, I became discontent with what I had, always searching for what I did not have, focused only on my own happiness. I became greedy. Jealousy and envy made me livid with anger. Dulled by ignorance, I cared little about others. The light became thinner and thinner, and the dark became thicker and thicker. Finally, I listened to the words of truth, spoken equally by my spiritual teachers and by great scientists, philosophers, psychologists, and faith leaders. Like a purifying wind, their wisdom blew the dark clouds away. We can experience great love when we exchange ourselves with others. Then we will know that my neighbor's problem is my problem. Then I will realize that your suffering is my suffering. Then the pure moon of compassion will shine clearly again. When I have the opportunity to listen to the great beings express themselves, I found that they can change my life immediately. Now is your chance to listen to the eminent practitioners from different faith traditions and fill your life with compassion and love. Thank you.
Thank you, Rinpoche. That's been a great blessing. As Rinpoche just said, I would just flag and underline his comment that when you listen to great minds and evolved souls, they profoundly impact us, and I feel particularly blessed and privileged to be sharing the stage with people of such eminence. I am sort of merely a struggling, failing aspirant, blessed to be a student of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And I can say that His Holiness would be hugely delighted and happy that the pre-climax of the event, because I would imagine the climax is His Holiness's visit tomorrow and his public address and the teachings, is this interfaith dialogue. He has often said that the interfaith discourse, the interfaith dialogue, but much more than dialogue, the cultivation of interfaith harmony and peace and mutuality and learning is one of his three primary motivations. And so he would be very, very pleased. Just in terms of housekeeping for the morning, each speaker will, each faith will be represented by a speaker, in the case of Hinduism by 2 speakers, and each faith will find 20 minutes to articulate their thoughts and ideas. And since there are a number of speakers and a very sharp, tight schedule, I will gently, on the 20th minute to the 19th minute, tap this signal that time is running out. And that will be followed by a discussion between our speakers on the stage and with the audience. And before each speaker speaks, we thought that a minute's silence so that we can have digested and processed what has preceded it. And before the very first speaker of the day, we will have a somewhat longer silence of 3 minutes. And the first speaker is Matthieu Ricard, and I am deeply privileged to describe him as a friend and someone who I have learned much from. He's a Buddhist monk, as we can see, but he's also a molecular biologist by training. And he has lived and studied Buddhism for more than 40 years. He's the author of several books, The Monk and the Philosopher, Happiness, A Guide to Developing Life's Most Important Skills, and Why Meditate. Several books of his photography have been published throughout the world. He's an active participant in the scientific research of the effects of meditation on the brain, working with the Mind and Life Institute. He has been the French interpreter for His Holiness for many decades. He lives in Nepal and donates all the proceeds of his books and conferences to Karuna Sheshan, a humanitarian organization that he founded in 2001 to honor his teacher. And one of the very familiar early images that I have of Matthieu is, with the wired brain cap, and that is an iconic image of Matthieu. So if we could just, speakers are welcome to either go on to the lectern or to speak from where they're seated. And as has been the convention during this, the practice during this Festival of Faiths, we will pause for 3 minutes of silence. And it starts when I gently touch this, and it concludes when I touch it again. So.
So, speaking of silence, an emotionless journey, like a mute trying to explain the taste of honey. Of course, there are many levels to silence. There's the outer silence of physical sounds. There's the silence of not using one's speech. There's the silence of wandering thoughts, and this is the silence of the ultimate nature of mind. So we can relate that concept, although I think in Tibetan literature there is not much commentary written on silence per se, but silence can be also related to simplicity and different levels of simplifying one's body, speech, and mind activities. So if we think of the just physical outer silence, it's certainly something that is conducive to contemplative practice. I think we don't realize how much noise pollution there is constantly in most of those places. So try to be silent here. So many things. We hear this machine running on and so many things. So when you actually go to places in nature, like in the Himalayas or somewhere, when there is actually almost perfect silence, it's quite amazing what any kind of sound has completely different dimension. It sometimes gives rise to strange experiences. Once I was sitting early morning at 13,000 feet on the shore of Manasarovar Lake in eastern Tibet, near Kailash, Mount Kailash. And I heard some ducks calling. It was almost perfect silence. And I sort of looked for the ducks, just could not see them. And then really looking, I saw 2 yellow ducks almost a kilometer away. And similarly, once I was in my hermitage in Nepal, and I heard some kind of fire, like when you burn dry branches, and I thought, oh, something, fire somewhere. So I just came out. It was on the other hill. Because of this perfect silence, it was like almost it was here. And the farmers there, they do speak from one hill to the next. I mean, try to speak here to someone across the street. They won't hear you. But there, I mean, they don't have a real conversation, but they say enough so that they can say, I'm coming, or please come, or something like that, across the hill, about 2 miles. And then there you know when the rain is coming, and we know from which direction. About a few minutes before, from the sound of the rain on the forest, good like, and you know it's coming from the left or the right. And then after a few minutes, it rains. Try to hear the rain here. I mean, so, and one night, there's a monastery on another hill across our hermitage. It's about, I would say, 2 miles. For those who have seen this photo exhibition the other day, it was this monastery in the middle of the clouds. And one night, I thought, how come they are beating the drums so late? Like it was 10 o'clock at night. Then I realized it's my blood beating in my ears. And then I had bought a clock from the valley of Kathmandu. And that tick, which I never heard in my room in Kathmandu, became so much I had to hide it under the pillow. So at least then there's no this kind of disturbance. So if you make noise in your mind, you are the only responsible. So that's already a good thing. You have the perfect place, the perfect condition for spiritual practice. So if you don't progress, you have no one else to blame. Then, of course, there's the silence of not speaking, which is one thing also that happens when you do retreats. And there's quite a lot said in the Buddhist scriptures about the benefits, the qualities of not speaking. We say actually the spiritual nerves, the nadis, which just go on the tongue, are the one that agitates the mind. So if you wave your tongue, your mind gets wild. So we also say the mouth, what do we say? The mouth is the open door for negativity, because you say all kinds of things. You criticize, you slander, so and you perpetuate mental confusion by this endless chatter. And if you look also in a very basic Buddhist ethics, there are 4 negative actions related to speech. One, of course, is lying. One is slander. But the third one is useless chatter. That just to waste your time, this blah, 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 which we do most of the time. And if we lose most sort of, unfortunately, so-called worldly conversation, there's so much that didn't need to be said, basically. So to keep silence for a while, make a vow of silence. Anyway, if you're alone in your hermitage, unless you speak to yourself, there's not much to speak. But still, to make this vow is sort of a powerful addition to concentrating in the practice. And especially if you do, of course, in the course of spiritual practice, there are many kinds of techniques and practice and methods. But especially when you do something which has to do with reciting mantras, it says it's very important to keep silence and have no other ordinary conversation with anyone. So this is one way, and for instance, my great teacher, Kukensere Moshe, those of you who were here yesterday, I showed some portraits of him. He would do long retreat in silence, and when he needed something, he had a slate which he covered with a little oil and the ashes from the earth, from where we cook the food, and he would write a few words with his fingernail. And sometimes it was very hard to decipher, so not to upset him, I would go outside and try to read together and see what he was actually asking for. So there's great benefit, I think, to that. So simplifying your activities, simplifying your speech, but the goal of all that is, of course, to simplify your mind. And why would we want to simplify or silence the mental chatter? Is because it is that mental chatter that keeps delusion sort of constantly fueling delusion. One thought comes and you give birth to a second one, a third one, and soon it's filling your mind with hopes and fears, with all kinds of delusions that begin with like a little spark and soon it's like a forest fire. Your mind is invaded with either any of the mental toxins. It might have to do with repulsion, attraction, anger, jealousy, pride, craving. So it all comes from this building up of thoughts. So to silence that, of course, is not just to come to a state of stupidity, but to be able, beneath the screen of those wandering thoughts, to see what's behind that screen, which is the luminous quality of mind, which is, of course, beyond words, beyond description, but which is the real experience of the fundamental nature of mind, that is freedom. Because within that sort of primordial space, then there's no way there could be hatred. There's no way there could be craving or pride. It's almost like looking at the sky and expect to find some kind of elephant or something. The sky will not lead to that. It just remains immaculate and luminous and transparent. And if sometime we have a glimpse, even a short glimpse of that, or some blessed occasion where the spiritual practice unfolds well, and you can rest in that simplicity, it seems almost inconceivable that one's mind could be overcome by either anger, craving, or jealousy. It seems how those things could ever take birth in the mind. So sometimes we describe this simplification of the body, speech, and mind. We say that in order to not to perpetuate worldly activities when you are engaged in spiritual practice, we should be almost like a corpse lying in the cemetery, that they don't do much. And the speech should be like a broken lute. You can't expect much music from it. And the mind should be like a spring that has run out of water. You're finished with those mental constructs. And it is not at all like trying to artificially block the thoughts. You can't block thoughts. If they are there anyway, what can you do? They're already there, so you can prevent them from being there. But it's more like this kind of silence, to take again the example of space. It's always there. And then sometime a bird will pass, and that's it. The bird doesn't change, leave no trace. The bird doesn't disturb or modify the sky. So, but main thing is usually we're distracted by the birds. We follow the bird, and another bird comes, and 1,000 birds, and we're only following the birds. And we lose there's so many birds that we lose track of the sky that is in which they move. So silencing is just like at dusk when the birds finally go to sleep. And there's only the beautiful sky. So it's a kind of simplification, and simplicity is a wonderful concept, because we are not lacking anything by just remaining in this state of simplicity. not fabricating concept, not superimposing or thinking this is either beautiful or ugly, that belongs to the object, this is either desirable or undesirable. This is all fabrication. It's all superimposed. We're making it up. We just better keep silent about making all these concepts. Imagine a rose, you know, for a poet can go endlessly about the beauty of the rose. No, for a snail, it's like a nice salad. For a tiger, there's absolutely no interest. So, it all depends. It's all added to we're adding all these things. So to bring this kind of silence is really simplicity. And it leads to some kind of freedom that comes, sometimes we speak of renunciation. That's a term that is not always well understood. We think of renunciation as giving up all what is good in life. You know, why we should do that? If it's really good and it's really useful, then why should we give it up? But is the bird giving up its cage, or is it freeing itself from the cage? So the bird is not renouncing its cage, it's just breaking out. Or if we are walking in the mountains with a rucksack and with some provisions, and you find that someone puts heavy stones in your rucksack, and you just leave them there, you're not renouncing anything. So renouncing is renouncing to the causes of suffering. So it's simplifying, it's putting to silence all the things that perpetuate suffering. So it's not at all renouncing to really what is wholesome and brings flourishing. So in that sense, silence is recognizing your true nature, free from all those fabrications. And even I think in Buddhist philosophy, we said that the ultimate truth cannot be reached by concept. It's beyond concept. So there's no point trying to describe it. We can just, by metaphors, by sort of saying what it is not, we can, if we said like a finger pointing to the moon, and we should not look at the finger, but look at the moon. So indication are invitation to direct experience of it, but again, the silence of concept, the freedom from concept. And we speak that there's many kinds of being free from concept of solid existence or total non-existence, concept of coming and going, and so forth. So we are full of those concepts that reify the ultimate reality and then bring us into delusion. And this is not just something intellectual, because if we have this basic reification and fabrication that's come from not being silent with concept, then the repercussions, as little by little, they will continue to build down. There will be the basic duality, then will come with feeling of a sense of a unitary, autonomous, permanent sort of self that we need to protect or to please. And then you will split between self and others, self and the rest of the world. Then attraction, repulsion, all those 84,000 mental toxins described in the scripture will come up, because your mind didn't know how to keep silent. So I think we're using that image of silence, we can describe the whole process of the path, going from this complex, endless chatter that ends up obscuring the sky of this primordial nature to a state of utter simplicity. And within that, instead of the mental toxins, what will naturally come sometimes is kind of very sort of blissful, of course, to which we should not cling. Sometimes something very luminous, to which we should not cling. Sometimes very spacious, without much concept, which also we should not cling to. But then we end up in this simplicity that is very vivid, that is very clear. And so that's the silence. So to say more about that, I don't know where to find the words.
Well, I should add that Matthieu has been the subject of scientific research. His brain is wired up often because he has done more than 10,000 hours of meditation.
50.
And it is from that kind of experience, and this figure of 10,000 was, seemed like 10 years ago. So 50,000 now.
What they count?
There you
I
are.
don't know. That's what they say.
50,000. 10,000 was
You have
the
to count,
baseline.
and there's sort of how many, let's see.
So
well,
that's
this, that, how many years on retreat, and so it doesn't make any sense, but we have to give a number to the scientists.
but nonetheless, so it's indicative of the degree of mind training that yields his insights that he has so eloquently shared with us. I think it's also pointing to an important idea common to many traditions, Sufism certainly, if you can silence the chatter, the noise inside of us, that the veils of ignorance are lifted, and ignorance is bred of that chatter, so that non-conceptual experience, whether you call it divine, you label it ultimate reality, is then experienced. I'd like to turn to Matthieu, because in the Sufi tradition you also have shabda, the aspect of recitation of mantra, and so here is using a particular sound to lead us to a deeper silence. So how does, in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, how do we understand the workings of sacred sound? Because ultimately that must have a place along with sacred silence.
So I think from Sanskrit, mantra etymologically means what protects the mind. That's the meaning. So protecting the mind from delusion. So why the repetition of, when I did this dialogue with my father, he says, repeating something like that seemed the zero level of spirituality, just mumbling the same thing for hours, So that's being kind of cuckoo, he thought. But actually, it does help to precisely get rid of that mental chatter. But it's not only that, of course. We begin with the impure perception of phenomenal world. We think of precisely this being very solid, this having intrinsic quality, so we solidify, we reify reality, and this attraction, repulsion, and same with sounds. We decide that some sounds are harmonious, some are discordant, and we discriminate. And then the thoughts are usually deluded thoughts, they don't spring out of wisdom. So one of the purpose of the kind of practice within which mantra recitation takes place, and it's not just out of context, it's also some visualization and mental practice, is to transform that impure perception into what we call pure perception, that is to see that all forms, whatever we can name, they can be the display of the kind of, we speak the body aspect of the Buddha, not that we see little Buddhas everywhere, but it is actually of the same quality as the Buddha's body. And all sounds, no matter what, the sound of water, the sound of what we call unpleasant noise, as just being the reverberation or the resonance of mantra. So then we don't think that this sound is, this is so disturbing. And there are some great yogis that they said they could actually hear the sounds of mantra in the running of water and things like that, hearing the sound of the elements and so forth. And then for the mind, of course, is to realize that all thoughts as this sort of spring out of the wisdom. So in that sense, to use mantra is part of that, transforming our impure perception of the phenomenal world into the primordial purity of form, sound, and thoughts. So it's not just out of context.
But in that process, there's also the acknowledgement that the visualization of the mantra is finally a projection of our own minds.
Actually, sorry, I wanted to complete that. So doing so, we have an artificial perception of this world because we superimpose. So this kind of practice is not making another layer of fabrication, like painting everything pink and say, oh, the world is pink, so beautiful. It's actually helping us to rediscover the true nature of phenomena. Otherwise, it would be yet another layer of artificial. So because it is the case that, you know, all forms are pure in the sense that they are free from the solid concept we have. They are appearing yet void. All sounds are resounding yet void of intrinsic existence. All thoughts are manifesting yet void of intrinsic existence. So it's just a way to helping us rediscover the true nature of things. It's not just making everything nice, you know, like a silver lining. That would be a further delusion, delusion upon delusion.
Yesterday, Swamiji, in his presentation, talked about the practical aspect of this is our reality check is that in the kinds of lives that we are able to lead, you know, few of us are able to escape to the mountains and retreat and to be able to hear the sound of the rain coming, is that we then have to train ourselves to work with or to separate, isolate the cacophony that are everyday lives in cities and places that we live in. And so he talked about how he would go near the freeway and train his mind to be able to first embrace and hence exclude that noise so that the inner noise could then begin to settle down and you could begin to look at that mindfulness. So how do you deal with when you come away from the rarefied atmosphere during retreat, when you've gained these profound insights and wisdoms, where you're able to hear that clock and put it away, but what of the sirens and the traffic outside? How do you deal with that?
So you see, a practice that will only help when you are sitting, there's a saying that it's easy to be a great meditator when you sit in the sun with your full belly. But the meditator is put on the scale when facing challenging experiences. So if it's just that you can only meditate when everything is fine and then your meditation completely goes to the drain, at the moment there's something happening, then you're just trying to protect yourself in the cocoon of some kind of self-centeredness. So the whole point is to gain the strength that we say like a wounded deer that hides in the forest, the time of healing the wound. So the wounds are the wounds of delusion, of mental poisons. And once the deer is healed, then he can just gamble, frolic around in the world. And he keep that strength. So then ideally, a great teacher, like if I think of Khyentse Rinpoche, wherever he would be, it's complete like one taste. And I've seen that on many occasions. Once, to give you a small example, we were traveling on the plane. He was invited to France. And then someone next to him, he made the tea for him. And there was a kind of flask of this yellow thing. He thought it was cream, so he put that full in the tea. And so Khyentse Rinpoche drank the tea and was doing his prayers. And then there was few last drops, and he gave it to his attendant. I was on the other side. Attendant looked, and he went, and he had put full pot of mustard. So then he said, but did you drink that whole thing? He says, oh, I thought that's the way they do tea here. And one time, someone, one of those, there's almost so many people who wants to do something to those great teachers, offer them treatment, this and that. So they say they want to do moksha, this heat thing. So like with the cigar, because he had some stomach digestion problems. So he was doing his prayers, bare chest, and the guy came and started, and then he was a bit distracted. So at some point we heard, we smelled the burning smell. He had completely burned Khyentse Rinpoche on his belly. And Khyentse Rinpoche didn't move, so he said, why didn't you say anything? Something like that. I was translating, and Khyentse Rinpoche said, he was just doing his prayers. Oh, I thought that was the treatment, he said. So you see now, but it's too easy to say, my work at the office is my meditation. I meditate in the subway, and there's no need to do formal practice. Basically, that's saying that, I don't feel like to make any effort. So, but to think that we can deal with all that seamlessly without training is a bit premature. So you know, it's like when you want to learn how to sail on a boat, you are not going to start on a day with a full storm. You will begin when there is fine weather, then you will know how to rig the sail and then later you can navigate in the storm. So that kind of what you acquire to the practice in silence and in beautiful, in sort of secluded place, then you know it stays a little bit with you so that you can preserve that in other conditions. So, but I think it's like exactly the experience. You know, an experienced horse rider, he would ride in very difficult terrain without falling down. So that is, I think, when we are exposed to the world, we need that preliminary. Otherwise, it's not too difficult, I guess.
Well, one of the privileges of being a moderator is that you get to ask eminent, incredible, evolved souls all the questions that come up for you, and so I feel indulgent and selfish. So is there anyone on the panel? Would you, sir?
All right. I just want to make a comment about the question of mantra. From the point of Islamic tradition, and I think also many other traditions, including Hindu tradition, a mantra is not just any sound that you repeat. If I can speak in Abrahamic terms, the mantra is a sacred bark sent from the other shore of existence to us to carry us back to the other shore of existence. And always implies the presence of the sacred itself within the sound system. There's a grace that is present, without which, no matter what you repeat all the time, is not going to get you from becoming to being, to the primordial state. And the reason why always within sacred formulas of mantras in different traditions, although it's a sound system, there's always presence of a silence. The silence represents the principial reality which determines that sound system. That's what is different between, let's say, sacred music and the cacophony we heard last night, which came from hell. So we had to shut up the meeting quickly. There's a very, very big difference. Sacred art, not the mandala, actually the mantra is the heart of it, in a sense, sacred sound and art of sound. But any sacred music even contains within itself an element of silence. The greatest musical performances in India, for example, where a great master succeeds, Ustad Akbar Khan or someone like that, is when he finishes, you don't clap. There's a silence unto which the experience returns. And it's very, very important to remember that mantra always contains already that silence which has sent the sound to us in order to return us back to the silent.
Yes, and actually, you're perfectly right. In Buddhism as well, you know, mantra has always the name of a particular aspect of enlightenment. So the mantra that Ajahn Rinpoche said the other day, Om Mani Padme Hum, is the speech embodiment of Avalokiteshvara, who is the Buddha of compassion. In the same way that you know, a physical appearance of Buddha Shakyamuni or a statue of Buddha will symbolize the body manifestation, the Rupakaya of the Buddha. The speech will symbolize the more subtle aspect of Sambhogakaya, and then you cannot represent the mind, which is the Dharmakaya or ultimate dimension, but the speech actually embodies all the power of transformation, according which is Manjushri, it would be the power of wisdom. If it's Avalokiteshvara, the power of compassion. If it's Vajrapani, it would be the power of enlightened activity. Is embedded in the name and the sound. And then if you go into the explanation of mantras, it's very deep. So, like you start Om Ahong, is the enlightened body, speech, and mind that transform your deluded body, speech, and mind. And then likewise. So every word has a meaning. If you have the word Padma in it, it represents the lotus that grows immaculate out of the mud. That means the Buddha nature that is never spoiled. And if you have Vajra, which is like the diamond, it means the ultimate nature cannot be destroyed in the world of illusion, and so forth. So it's both the name, say Padma, Vajra Padma, the name of Padmasambhava, but it's also the ultimate meaning that is indestructible. And then at the end, you end up with a syllable like Hong or another one that calls for this accomplishment to actually take birth in your mind. So if you do, while you recite, also understand the meaning, then it opens a way to further your practice.
Father, what about your tradition?
You know, I think I can probably only say the obvious, but among the many gifts that I think what we call Eastern religions are giving and have given to the West is this connection between the medium and the message. And I don't know what all the cultural factors were that made the West do what it seemed like a nonstop flight to what it thought was the message. It gave the doctrine, the dogma, the belief, the metaphysics, believe it. We tried to convince people to believe it. But over the centuries, there was just a huge disconnect between the medium and the message. And if you were doing nothing else for the reform of our religion, then reconnecting us with what is in our tradition, but is simply not known at the common level. Protestant, Catholic, Orthodox too. I don't know what it is that made us so concerned with forcing belief in concepts, which is what it became. So I find it so gratifying when you talk the way you do and help us see that how we get there is where we get. Yeah, I think it's absolutely essential for the reform of Western Christianity. Now, my job is as a Franciscan, is to help them see it was always there, but it was the minority position. It was the alternative orthodoxy, as we call it in Franciscanism. So I'm just so grateful to hear you speak the way you speak. Thank you. Thank you.
To sort of take this, perhaps a final step in the context of this discussion further, both to Swamiji and Didi, in the Indian tradition too, the mantra has a very sacred space and a practice. And it also is a question, as Matthieu was directing us towards, is to find the appropriate mantra for us as practitioners in terms of what our need, psychological, psycho-spiritual, whatever phrase you want to use, that a particular deity and the mantra associated with it is that connect is extremely important. And perhaps the Guru plays a very important role in helping us identify this particular practice appropriate for us. So could you give us a sense of, as practitioners who want to access an appropriate mantra for ourselves, how do we go about it?
That's a very large question, and one that I'm afraid I can't give a satisfying answer to here in a situation like this, because it first depends on the tradition that a person comes from, and that's sort of the first, or not necessarily, because I didn't start out in this tradition, but the tradition that one is living, the tradition one is practicing. And so the practice that you take, the practice that one takes, the type of practice, that is first determined by the thought world in which you live. If you're within the Buddhist realm of practice and thought, then that would be the first determining factor. One like myself in the Hindu realm of practice, or the Christian or the Islamic. And so the determination of a mantra, that's a very complex fact. But there is one thing that I would like to say about that, and that is that, first of all, there's no one practice which is right for everyone. The practice of mantra is a widely used and a very, very efficacious practice, but there's no practice which is meant for everyone. But as far as the practice of the mantra goes, It is important, as Matthieu affirmed, and as Dr. Nasr beautifully said also, that the mantra is intrinsic. What makes a mantra? What separates a mantra from an ordinary word? Mantra is a word which is intrinsically connected to spiritual reality. Whether you think of it in the Buddhist terms of an aspect of enlightenment, whether you think of it in terms of deity, but a mantra is intrinsically connected to that which it not only represents. The word cow represents the animal cow or the thought of cow, but a mantra not just represents an aspect of reality or enlightenment or divinity, but it embodies it. And so the mantras come from a higher state of awareness, a state of spiritual awareness. They're revealed. And so you find, like in the Orthodox Christian tradition, where the name of Jesus was often used as a mantra, or the publican's prayer was used as a mantra, containing the name of Jesus, the name Jesus itself is a mantra. Why? It wasn't that Mary decided, oh, I had a wonderful Uncle Jesus, and so I want to name my child Jesus because I was so fond of Uncle Jesus. No, the angel came and said, his name shall be Jesus. And so it was a revealed name. It was a name that came from a spiritual plane. So that's what makes a mantra, and that's what makes it effective. And just one last thing, let me add to that to complete the thought. There was an American doctor some years ago who was criticizing the practice of mantra. He said that there's nothing to it. If you repeat dog over and over again, it will gradually tire the mind out. The mind will become quiet. Well, no, that's not the idea of the practice of a mantra, is just to tire the mind out by repeating dog, 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 dog. The idea of a mantra is that it awakens that which it represents.
I think also that I should point out that at the more mundane material level, people at my level, certainly also use mantras for more practical aspirations, like the chanting of the Lakshmi mantra, which is the goddess of wealth, when I feel materially challenged, or Lord Ganesh to overcome obstacles. And I think that much of this is circumscribed, as in the as we learned from His Holiness and the Buddhist tradition, by our motivation. Why do we seek to use mantra? Towards what end? And there is the other side of the misuse of mantra. But Didi, a final comment from you.
When I was a child, I used the mantra, and it was Om Bhur Bhuvah Swaha Tat Savitur Varenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yona Prachodayat. And that was the only mantra I knew, and I think every Hindu child knows that. And I used it very conveniently. I used it at the bus stop, waiting for my bus to take me to school. So if I recite it 3 times, a bus will come. And I thought, before I go to sleep, I should do something. So I would recite the mantra 3 times, but sometimes I'd get tired of it after reciting it twice, and I'd say, okay, twice is enough, or sometimes even 1 time was enough. Not realizing that mantras are very powerful, because words are very powerful. Words that we speak to one another, if I speak in a calm voice and kind words, then I have the power to calm your mind down. If I speak to you harshly, if I speak harsh words to you, I can anger you and frustrate you. So words are very, very powerful, and the mantras contain names of God. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. And that when I recite this mantra, it makes me think about the Lord in the form of Krishna. And so the mantra calms my mind down. It brings happiness to my mind. And as was pointed out by Swamiji, that we could say dog, 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 or we could say Krishna, Krishna, Krishna. There's a big difference. I once visited a household, and these people had a pet parrot who was very talkative. And so the parrot was saying Ram, 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 Ram. And he was saying all sorts of short mantras, names of God, really. And the parrot was so clever that now he knew the frequent visitors. So if the visitor was accustomed to greeting people by saying Ram Ram, the parrot would know this, and the parrot would say Ram Ram. If the parrot knew that this person says Hari Om, then the parrot would say Hari Om. I was a newcomer to the parrot. So the parrot didn't know what to say to me. So I said Ram Ram, Hari Om, Ram Ram, Hari Om. And not realizing that I greet everyone by saying Radhe Radhe. So by taking the name of the Divine Mother, Radha. So to the parrot, the mantra means nothing. But to the human, the mantra means so much. When I hear Ram Ram, immediately I have this image formed in my mind of God in his very gentle form, who's very compassionate, with loving eyes and eyes full of love and mercy and compassion. So words are very powerful, and mantras are extremely powerful because they work on our mind and they calm the mind down.
Well, I can't help but think as to what the parrot's karma must have been like and how it sort of added up. Yes, Matthew, please.
If you are interested in the mantra for prosperity and wealth, I have one that's really good. So my mantra for wealth, which I absolutely love, is repeat 7 times, I did nothing, I did nothing, I did nothing. It feels so good when you finish. I tell you, such a freedom.
If I could introduce now Swami Atmarupananda, what can I say that I feel very partial to Swamiji as I do to Matthieu, because my own first introduction to the spiritual tradition was from Swami Ranganathananda of the Ramakrishna mission, and well, that's a personal story. Swami Atmarupananda discovered the Vedanta tradition of Hinduism as a student in Sweden. He joined the order at the age of 19 and later spent many years in India, engaged in monastic, scholarly, and spiritual training. He was the leading member of the Snowmass Interreligious Conference before his recent move to India and is active in interfaith issues. He is a founding member of the Spiritual Alliance convened by the Global Peace Initiative of Women and a participant in its ongoing Sufi, Yogi, and Hindu-Buddhist dialogues. Currently, he is working on a new critical edition of the complete works of Swami Vivekananda in 10 volumes in celebration of the 150th anniversary of his birth. Swamiji served at the Ramakrishna Mission in California and is now back in Belur Math, which is the headquarters of the order which Swami Vivekananda founded. And as I mentioned earlier, before Swamiji speaks, we'll just have a minute's silence so that we can reflect on the wisdom that has preceded us. Swamiji, you have 10 minutes.
Yes, yes. Because we're sharing a tradition, our time will be 10 each. I'm going to speak more on the idea of self. But first, let me just say, in reference to an idea that Matthieu beautifully developed at the beginning of his talk about silence in the Himalayas, that I had the blessing of living 5 years. He's been for 45 years in the Himalayas, but I had the blessing of living at least 5 years there. And I've never experienced such physical silence as I experienced there. It was an extraordinary thing. And so his descriptions are no exaggeration. I've never experienced this, the physical silence that I had there. There was a bird called the bell bird that only in the evening it would make its sound, and it would be like the perfect 2 peals of a bell, ding dong, but it's just like a perfect peal of a bell, with long intervals in between, and that sound of the bird emphasized the silence so much that it made it even more quiet, just that pure sound of the bell every minute or so. But as I said, I will speak more about the self and compassion rather than silence, but silence is inherent in the subject as I will speak of it. And why speak of the self? One reason is that in Hinduism, the very beginning, from ancient times, the very beginning of the search was for who am I? Who am I? And when we look into ourselves, we find that it is the present sense of self that we have which is the source of all of our problems. It's the source of our competition. It's the source of our exclusion of other people. I think of myself as this psychophysical being with a separation between my psychophysical being and everything around me. I'm here, you are there. And at the physical level, there is the principle of exclusion that works. If I'm sitting here, you can't sit here unless you pull me out of the chair first, or unless I willingly leave. And so at this level of self, the air that I'm breathing, while I'm breathing the air, you can't breathe that same air. You breathe your air, I breathe my air, and our air circulates. But that which I'm breathing, the food that I'm eating, when I'm eating it, you can't eat it. And so this, the sense of a self which needs protecting, the sense of a self which needs sustaining, and the self which needs reifying and protecting from the outer world. That is so strong in our present experience. And so the Hindu tradition begins in some ways with the search for who am I? And when we look at ourselves, I'm not going to go into the whole process of that search, because that itself would be a long, long talk. I have to shorten it greatly, and so I'll give you the essence. The ancient sages found, and we can find ourselves now, it's not a doctrine which was passed down, but a discovery, an experiment which is passed down. One of the things they discovered was, in seeking who I really am I really Swami Atmarupananda? Am I this body-mind, physical, psychophysical complex? Am I essentially this person with a personal history, etc.? Am I this person with a particular gender, a particular age, etc.? They began to, or they found that there was a distinction in our experience between the seer and that which is seen. That is, I can see the world around me, and so I'm the observer, and the world is that which is observed. I can see this physical body, and so I'm the observer of the body. I can't essentially be, I'll come back to a state of unity behind all of this, but in the initial search, they found that I see the world around me, I'm the perceiver, the world is the perceived. There's an essential difference between the experiencer and that which is experienced. I can see this body, and so the body cannot be essentially me. I can watch my thoughts, and the mind is nothing. There's not an organ called the mind which is exuding thoughts like an organ secreting hormones, etc. The mind is its activity, and so I can see the mind's activity. Even the unconscious activity can gradually become conscious through meditative discipline. That's one of the things that meditation does. And so I can see the mind, I can see the body. So I can't essentially be the mind, I can't essentially be the body. And so through this process, they began to search, well, who am I at the root of my existence? And they found that I am the unseen seer. Now again, I'll come to a point of unity in just a moment, but first let me say a word about that. They came to see that I am the perceiver of everything. I am awareness itself. I am the awareness in which everything is experienced. And so you find these beautiful statements of sages who said, Aho aham namo mahyam daksho nasti hamat samaha. Wonderful am I, salutations to myself. There's none so capable as I. That sounds like a very egotistical statement. But he says, I who hold this whole universe within my awareness without touching it with the body. That is, this whole universe, where does the universe exist? It actually exists within myself. And so then they began to find that where does this body exist? It exists within consciousness. Where does the mind exist? It exists within consciousness. Where do I see all of you? I think that I see you out there because I think that I'm essentially the body, and the mind is inside, and whatever we call consciousness is inside the mind. But they found no, that everything rests in consciousness. The universe itself, and I can't, because of time, develop that idea in a way, it's easy to show scientifically that this is the truth. Those scientists have not taken to the idea, but it's easy to use scientific knowledge to show that the whole universe that I perceive within my own awareness, and that's true for all of us. And so then the point of unity came when they saw that when you come to that point of awareness, there's neither I nor thou. There's neither subject nor object. There's neither seer nor seen. And then one comes to the point where you see that there's an underlying unity behind everything. And so that was the idea of self. Hinduism begins by who am I? Buddhism begins by the denial of the idea of self. From our standpoint, the two come together experientially, because the self for the Hindu is not the sense, not even the sense of I am, not even the sense of the seer. The sense of self is that which is unnameable, unperceivable, non-conceptual, and which is non-dual, which is beyond all concept, beyond all word, etc. And so that is the heart of compassion. When I can begin to see that the essential being which I am, that within me which says I am, has its source in that, awareness, where the individual becomes identified with the cosmic, and the individual becomes identified with the divine. Not in the sense that I am God and so I can make the sun rise in a different direction from the way it rose this morning, but in the sense that my essential being is one with the essential being of this universe, the wisdom, the love, which is the source of this universe. So when I can come to that, then I can begin, when I come to that understanding, then I can begin to understand that my own purposes are not served by separating everyone outside of myself, by making everyone different from myself. Truth is served, love is served, happiness is served. All that we want is served by inclusion. To think that, and I don't mean this as a political statement. It shouldn't be a political statement. It's very unfortunate that it has become politicized. It's a moral statement, and so it's something that I'm saying from a spiritual standpoint. To think that in a country as great as America, my own country, that we would think that we don't have the money, a country that's the richest country in the world, we don't have the money to educate our young people, that we have to begin to sacrifice the education of young people. No, that's not a political statement, that's a moral statement. Politics is about how do we do it, whether it's better done through the private sector or the public sector or whatever. But this, I bring that up because this idea of inclusion, when I begin to see that my being is expansive, my being is containing, that my being is that which contains all of us, then I begin to see that, no, I have a responsibility to everyone too. I have love for everyone. And so that's the root of compassion. We begin where we are. We begin where we are, and that is by learning kindness, learning to feel for others, learning to substitute myself for others. And in that way, I begin to grow in the sense that there is not this radical separation between self and other, and eventually there's the experience of unity. Let me say a couple of other things about that if I have a minute to do it within, and that is that if that's the truth of my being now, if the truth of my being is that a non-dual experience of unity with the world around me and with others around me, that should be perceivable within my present experience. How can I do that? One thing is, and I don't have time to develop it, so I just present it, that is to begin to see that the universe arises within my awareness. Then I begin to feel a unity pervading everything. Another much easier practice, which all of us can do, is just there is a sense of unity pervading all of our present experience, which we experience right now. It's just that we don't pay attention to it. It's like wearing glasses. If you wear them for a long time, you forget that you're wearing them. Every perception we have, every thought that we have, is within a background of unity. And so if I can just sit quietly, a very simple meditation, very effective, difficult in the beginning to get a feeling for it, but quickly we can get a feeling for it, and just feel the sense of unity pervading all things. You can't have even the initial experience of unity, the most rudimentary experience of unity, without recognizing that unity as something holy, as something spiritual. The idea that the universe is nothing but matter, that's a conceptual idea. Matter itself is only conceptual. No one has ever seen or experienced matter. But we do have, within our own experience at present, a sense of unity pervading everything. All of the details that I see are within the field of unifying existence. And if I can feel that, I begin to feel the sense of sacredness which is pervading all things. And that's the root of compassion. When I begin to feel that the other is not other. The other is part of myself, part and parcel of myself, a reflection of myself, or my own being.
Thank you, Swamiji. Siddheshvari Devi ji, addressed as Didi ji. Didi is Sacred Sister, is the founder of the Radha Madhav Society, a non-profit charitable organization working in America, Canada, and Trinidad, functioning under the auspices of the Jagat Guru Kripalu Parishad. She works and strives to spread the deep spiritual teachings of Hinduism and dispel the myths and misconceptions related to it. An eloquent speaker, her mission is to simplify the eternal message of the Vedas and the Shastras and awaken love for God within the hearts of seeking souls. Just pause for 30 seconds of reflection before Didi ji speaks.
Namaste. Hinduism values renunciation very much, and many Hindus take pride in the fact that some distant relative or a close relative has renounced the world and has joined a monastery. And it's a sense of, they look upon a sannyasi, someone who has renounced the world, with awe and wonder. Of course, the sannyasi looks upon the householder with awe and wonder also, because the sannyasi has chosen the easier path. The householder thinks the sannyasi has chosen a difficult path. The sannyasi, the renunciate, thinks the householder has chosen a more difficult path. When I was quite a bit younger, I was in Vrindavan, the sacred land of Lord Krishna in India. That is where he descended, and that is where he performed his sweet leelas or pastimes. I was in one of our ashrams in India, and I was standing outside, and I saw a young couple who had just gotten married. And I overheard the young man say something to his bride, and what he said was, he spoke in Hindi, and he said, "Bechari ke upar kya beeta hoga." He looked at me, and obviously I'm wearing these saffron robes, and he said to his wife, "Poor thing, look at her, poor thing. I wonder what happened to her in life that she chose this life." And that made me chuckle, because what I was thinking was, exactly at that point, what I was thinking is, oh, poor things, they actually chose the more difficult path. Our path is the same. As Swamiji said, who am I? And I will say more further, what do I want in life, and how will I attain it? These are the three questions for the sannyasi, as well as for someone living the householder's life. But the sannyasi has chosen an easier path, because he or she is not, does not have to go to work. That sannyasi does not have to attend parties and other such functions. And so he's able to retreat in silence. The householder has to figure out the answers and gain the answers to who am I, what do I want in life, and how will I reach it. While living a worldly life, while going and doing work outside the house and inside the house, it's more difficult to retreat in silence when you have when you have the mortgage payments to make, and when you have to deal with coworkers and the boss, and you have to run a business, and you have to be out there in the world and doing worldly duties. But the aim of both is really the same, to retreat in silence and to retreat from Maya. And while living in the world, the aim is to discover the divine who has concealed himself in this world and who is all-pervading. So the sannyasi now has an opportunity, more of an opportunity. The renunciate has more of an opportunity to retreat in silence, because there are not so many demands made on him. And he has an opportunity to become more compassionate, because he chose not to be married, he chose to remain celibate, he chose not to get into the worldly life, the family life, I should say. Now his affection and his love are not restricted to just a few people, but now he can think about the welfare of many people. And if he's very elevated, he can think about, and when he becomes God-realized, when he becomes a realized soul, now his compassion, he becomes so compassionate that he thinks about the welfare of the entire world. And in one of the Hindu scriptures called the Ramcharitmanas, it is said, Sant hridaya navneet samana, kaha kavinh pe kaha na ana, nij paritap dravai navneeta, par dukh dravai susant punita. Meaning, some poets have said that the saint's heart, by saint I mean someone who has realized God, one who is experiencing the omnipresence of God and not just talking about it, not just hearing about it, not just reading about it, but he's experiencing the omnipresence of God, that saint, that realized soul, his heart is as soft as butter. But the saint who wrote this scripture that I just quoted from, Saint Tulsidas, he says, but I don't agree with that. I say that the saint's heart is infinitely softer than butter, because butter melts due to its own sorrow. You put butter in a skillet, you light the fire, you light the stove, and put the skillet on the stove. Now the butter starts melting because of the heat that it's experiencing. So the saint said the butter is melting due to its own sorrow, but the heart of a saint melts looking at the sorrows of others. Par dukh dukh, sukh sukh dekhe par. When he sees the suffering of others, he suffers as if he were suffering himself. And when he sees the happiness of others, he feels very, very joyful. He feels very happy. So seeing the misery of others, he feels miserable. He feels the pain of others. And seeing the happiness of others, he becomes very happy. And he wishes them more and more success and more happiness. He has true compassion, because his vision is now universal. And his good wishes extend not only to just the extended family at the end, in the beginning of his day and at the end of the night. He does before going to sleep. And upon waking in the morning, he does not say, "Oh Lord, help my family members, please keep my children safe." His good wishes they extend to the entire world and in the entire universe, and countless universes. There is a wonderful story that my guru told about compassion, learning compassion. There once lived a king, and he had a son, the prince, and as kings would do often, he sent his son to the Gurukul, the hermitage of the guru, to learn. And the prince was a very bright young man, and he learned many, many lessons from the guru. And the king would come in and visit his son and his guru, of course. And the king asked one day, "Guruji, is my son ready now?" And the guru said, "Well, I've got to teach him one more lesson, that's it, and he's done." The king asked, "May I audit this class? May I sit in?" And the guru said, "Yes, of course." So now the final lesson was this. The guru did not speak a word. He just took a whip and he started beating the prince. He gave him 1 lash, 2 lashes, 5 lashes. The king cried out, "Guruji, why are you beating my son? What did he do?" The guru said, "You're only auditing this class. Be quiet. Don't ask me questions. Don't disturb my class." So then, after a while, the guru stopped beating the prince, and the prince had been crying in pain all this time. And the king said, "Guruji, please, no offense, but what was this lesson all about? You were just beating my son." The guru said, "One day your son is going to become the king. He's the heir to the throne, and one day he'll become the king, and he will have to perform many duties. One of those duties would be to punish the wrongdoer." Now, a case would come in front of him. This man has stolen that man's goat. And what is the punishment? And he may say, "Give him 50 lashes. I want him to know the pain of 50 lashes. What it feels like. I want him to know the pain that the 50 lashes will bring to a person. I want him to be a just king, a compassionate king, and this is why this lesson was so important." Hindu scriptures say that someone who has realized God is completely compassionate. But we who have not yet reached that exalted state, what are we to do then? How are we to become more compassionate? How do we become more compassionate? Regarding this, and I speak from the tradition of bhakti, the tradition of devotion. So regarding this, there are 2 practices. One is called karma sannyas, the other is called karma yoga. Karma meaning actions, duties, responsibilities, and sannyas meaning renunciation. So one practice is that you renounce that, even if you're not a sannyasi, even if you have not renounced the world, but you sit at home, preferably early in the morning, and you retreat from the world and you retreat into silence, which is within. But you use words, you use mantras, and you use kirtans, you use the names of God, you use the glory of God, you use sweet words which will affect your mind very positively, which will bring the mind to a higher consciousness. And you take yourself away, take your mind away from Maya and towards God. And God is all compassionate. God is infinitely compassionate. And when you think about God, when you focus the mind on God, then God enters the mind along with all his qualities, including compassion. And you become more compassionate, you become more loving, you become more understanding. It's a very practical method, which is common to all religions. And then the other practice is karma yoga. Now, you can't stay in your prayer room or in a part of the house where you can get some privacy. Now you have to do your household chores, you have to go to your job, workplace, you have to run a business, etc. Now what do? Now karma yoga. You're driving to your office, you're driving to work, and the car in front of you is really the driver is frustrating you because he's going too slow, or he is just going here and there, and you're becoming frustrated. Now, you need to have compassion for this person, whoever it is. And so now you think, it is my Lord who is driving that car. And then you say, my Lord, take your time. You're driving slowly, you're very, very safe, and then that's a good lesson for me to learn. So please, continue going slowly. You go to your work, and the boss is there, and the boss is not very kind. He speaks harsh words, but then be compassionate towards that boss, because God is within him, and you actually visualize God to be standing right there, and he's smiling at you, and then you say, my Lord, you are testing me through this person, through my boss, and you dwell within him, and the Lord then merges within the boss, and you say, my Lord, you are within my boss. And then again, our consciousness changes, and we become more compassionate, and we start thinking, what kind of a day did he have? What is going on with his family? Something is wrong, and I should be compassionate. I should understand what he's going through. So even while living in the world, we can learn to be more compassionate, and there are these two practices. One is to retreat in silence, away from family members, away from the cell phone, away from the iPhone, away from the iPad and the iPod, away from all these distractions that take us away from the Supreme, and just retreat in silence and use divine words, use sacred words to raise consciousness, and then go out in the world, but remind yourself that God is always there. I had a very profound experience in Oklahoma City once. I was taking my afternoon nap, and as soon as I got up because of the ringing of the phone, and in that split second, something spoke to me, and what I understood was that when the phone rings, think it's God calling you. When the doorbell rings, think it's the Lord who's at the door. Think of God in all circumstances. Use every excuse to think of the Supreme, because we know in theory that he is everywhere, and he's within us, and he is within that person and within that person. But from a very practical point of view, how do I realize that? It's by thinking of him and actually visualizing him in every tree, in every plant, in every near every body of water, and in the house, in my room, in the kitchen, not only in the prayer room, but in the kitchen, in the living room, in the dining room, in the bedroom. He is everywhere, and he is all compassionate. He's all merciful, and I should also strive to be more compassionate. And in these two, through these two very powerful practices, and I speak from experience, I am an aspirant. I am trying to become a lover of God. And so I can share with you that these two practices have helped me greatly. They've helped me tremendously in becoming a more compassionate person. I can feel the pain of others much more than I did before. And I will conclude by saying that in my personal case, that my guru has been so instrumental in teaching me compassion, and indeed in teaching me what compassion is in the first place, that it's not pity, that it is realizing that God dwells within every living creature, not just in every human, but in every living creature. Now, my guru is a very, very important personality, but he has never made himself, he has never shown that to the world. He is he's been acknowledged as the topmost authority on the scriptures, but he doesn't show that. When I saw him for the first time, I thought that he would look down upon the rest, and he would make us feel very, very worldly. He would make me feel very worldly. But what he did was to simply give me an embrace, and what he said was, I've been waiting for you for such a long time, and you are finally here. And he shed tears. And from that moment, I started understanding what true love is and what true compassion is. So in my life, I am blessed with the presence of a truly holy man who is extremely compassionate and most loving. Thank you.
Thank you, Didi ji. In the Hindu tradition, we've just heard of the enormous significance of renunciation, and so much that even in the life of a householder, there are 3 stages. You know, the stage of the student, the stage of where he fulfills his obligations and duties and experiences as a householder, and then the final stage, the 3rd act, is that of a renunciate in either case. But there was what has emerged in the articulations of the idea of the self, and if you watched the wonderful session yesterday morning, that the manner in which modern contemporary scientific research is demonstrating that the more we are able to diminish our sense of the self, of the I, the happier we are. And the traditional practices are really aiming to achieve that, whether it is the journey of bhakti, of jnana yoga, of contemplation, of the karma yoga that she mentioned. The karma is really the way of action, of a proactive engaging in the world without attaching oneself to the fruits of one's actions. The path of the mind, of intellectual engaging, and the path of, well, shall we say, psychic practice, or the Raj Yoga, which is more the engaging in the specific techniques and practices of mind training that can bring about that insight. But if I could turn to Father, this aspect of who am I, and how that I merges in a sense, or softens as it merges with the larger divinity, or the image from Sufism of the cup of consciousness which defines the individual, Jung, the larger universal, the collective subconscious. So in each of these there is this element of softening of the I. Could you share that with us, and how that?
Shall I start, Father?
Well,
yes. I will just quote 2 points for you to show you how universal the question, who am I, that Sri Ramana Maharshi made famous in the 21st century, is to all religions. The great Sufi of the 4th Islamic century, the 10th, 11th century, Mansour Hallaj, who was made very famous in the West by the works of Louis Massignon, and many people have defined Sufism through his eyes in the West, has a poem that, with your permission, I'll quote it in Arabic because no Arabic has been mentioned here in these few days. It says, رَأَيْتُ رَبِّي بِعَيْنِ قَلْبِي فَقُلْتُ مَنْ أَنْتَ فَقَالَ أَنْتَ. I saw God with the eye of my heart. I asked him, who art thou? He said, thou. This answer, who am I? Exactly what you said. It's one of the most famous Arabic poems. And then the great philosopher and Sufi Suhrawardi said, if you want to discover who you are, you must remember that you are not I, you are not you, you are not thou, you are not he, you are not she, you are not it, you are not we, you are not you in the plural, and you are not them. Once you meditate that your real you is not related to any of the pronouns with which you identify all identities, you'll find out who you are. I think we just meditate on these 2 points, you will see how universal the question you ask is in various traditions.
Well, particularly the practice that you mentioned, that I am not this, is the neti, neti, neti in the Vedanta tradition.
Yes.
A very similar, if not identical, practice. Father,
if there's any one thing that has, in my opinion, anesthetized the transformative power of Christianity, it's been the over-exaggeration of the individual. We have the doctrine of the body of Christ, the communion of saints. The classic description of the whole journey was the purgative way, the illuminative way, the unitive way. But the vast majority of Christians never got to the unitive way. It was simply this endless moralistic purging of the early path, which then we became preoccupied with our unworthiness. So we paid a big price for this exaggerated individualism. It was never good enough, moral enough, holy enough, worthy enough. And so you see the preoccupation with shame and guilt and sin, which of course, that's the price you pay for. If this little thing here has to carry the whole burden, it's going to feel inadequate. And when you don't lead people to at least the illuminative, but hopefully the unitive path, which you describe so beautifully, I think compassion toward the self even becomes impossible. Much less were we capable of love of the enemy, or the outsider, or compassion toward the poor, or those on the edge. So I think what you're describing for us is just, again, as I said before, we had it, but it never reached the common Christian to realize that they were capable of unitive consciousness. In my book, Naked Now, used the word non-dual, and I wrote that book with some trepidation, because I thought, oh yeah, all these Western Christians are going to think, oh, he's Buddhist now, or he's Hindu now, as if that's bad, of course. But I want to say, 3 years later, I've received almost no pushback on that. It's almost like the Western mind is finally ready to recognize that the name of contemplation is non-dual consciousness. It's just about as simple a description as you can get. And I don't know why it took us so long to get there, except this exaggerated individualism, which is incapable of unitive consciousness with itself, with the neighbor, and with God himself, herself. So we paid a big price for not listening to the other hemisphere of our brain, which is what I love to call the Eastern world, you know. Yeah.
Swamiji.
I'd just like to remark on that, as Father Richard well knows, when you read the Christian mystics, it's amazing, the experiences, the depth of experience, the depth of that non-dual experience that they had. Many, not just one or two. I mean, it's easy to point to one like Meister Eckhart, but he was not alone. There were so many Christian mystics who had profound depths of this transcendent experience, which is also immanent as well as transcendent. That is, the transcendent doesn't mean off there somewhere, but that which is experienced right here. The non-dual beyond the distinction of I and thou. Saint Teresa of Avila, she speaks in the experience of unity, where she said there's a room with two windows, and light coming from this window and light coming from that window. But inside the room, you can't say, well, this speck of light is from that window and this speck of light is from that window. There's just light.
I'd like to just ask Father Richard one question. When Swamiji mentioned Saint Teresa of Avila and then Saint John of the Cross, such saints loved, they thought of the divine as a beloved. And that did not get, how is that perceived in Catholicism?
It's amazing how many of our mystics did resort to erotic, bridal language as the only language adequate, as did the Sufis too, to describe what was going on between God and the soul. But again, that became something for esoterics. The normal Catholic in the corner parish never was told that or invited into that, as if this was only for Teresa and John of the Cross. So what a disservice we did to the West. And that goes back to Jesus himself, who Jesus' most common metaphor for eternity is the wedding banquet. Again and again, and he even calls himself the groom. So it's founded in Jesus, but we juridicized, I don't know what other word to use, much of the spiritual journey. It was presented in juridical terms instead of bridal, wedding, erotic. We have the Song of Songs in the Hebrew Scriptures, beautifully included in the what we once called the Old Testament, but now we know it's not old, it's still ours. But even with that kind of inclusion, it makes you want to weep that we didn't give the best to most of our people. We really didn't.
What would that best have been? Could you articulate that briefly for us?
Well, it's what you're all saying already. This sense of what we call the good news, that God is for us more than we're for ourselves, that God is, my deepest me is God, as St. Catherine of Genoa loved to say. They said she used to run through the streets of Genoa, shouting it like a crazy lady. My deepest me is God. My deepest me is God. But we didn't emphasize or even teach that unitive, delightful communion. Instead, it was what I call carrot on the stick theology. In Catholic form, in Protestant form, it was always, God, just, attend a few more church services or obey a few more commandments, and one day, maybe, perhaps, but probably not, you'll get there. And so the vast majority of Christians became cynical about themselves or about their own possibility because the engine was not within. It was a performance contest without. So that was supposed to be the good news, which we called the gospel. But I'm afraid the good news was just too good. And so we didn't offer our people the good news, And people who did give it to us in different language, we called them, Eastern religions or pagans or something. When they were describing that same wedding banquet as all three of you so beautifully have, and I know the Sufis do. So, anyway.
May, as a Muslim brother, add, since he's a Franciscan, one of the reasons is precisely the eclipse of Franciscan spirituality, which took place at the end of the Middle Ages, began of the Renaissance. The Franciscans always carried the torch as much as they could, but they were eclipsed so much in the Catholic Church.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
I think
We have the whole legend of Rumi and Francis meeting one another in a bar in Turkey. They were partial contemporaries. Whether it happened, we don't know, but it's a perfect story.
Yes.
Well, that's a thought for the next festival. Non-alcoholic beer.
There you go.
Well,
Served in India.
There really is a story.
Pardon me?
There really is a story about St. Francis and Rumi.
And Rumi, yes. On his way to Egypt, that he stopped in Turkey, and they met in a bar in Konya. Yeah, we tell it. Again, we can't prove it. But the very word Sufi means woolen, which is what our habit was too at that time.
And also your hood.
Yeah.
It's the jalaba. Look at the Moroccan here. I was once a young man participating in the first conference held after the Second World War on Christian-Muslim relations in Tumblilin in Morocco. And with a Franciscan priest, a friend of mine, we decided to go down to the Sahara, and I was wearing complete Islamic dress, the jalaba, and we came to a Franciscan monastery. We went in, and it was my big picture in the papers in the back of the door. And he thought, the priest thought I was a Franciscan. As soon as I discovered I was a Muslim, he tore down the picture. That was the end of it, but we're brothers.
Sorry.
Franciscans.
well, I have to press the pause button for a 20-minute break, but I do want to acknowledge that we celebrate you, Father, for your enormous candor and acknowledgement of the predicaments that you see around Christianity. And as someone who lives in India, the sort of a melting pot of many Eastern traditions and Christianity and Western traditions too, that I'm not sure that we, and I'm nowhere near that league, accurately present the reality of the way in which Eastern traditions are progressively expressing and manifesting themselves. And then we have the extreme right wing, the RSS, the BJP. We have in the Islamic traditions, with people like Dr. Nasr are not will not acknowledge as true followers of the faith.
I criticize it. I certainly acknowledge it.
And
I
so
don't acknowledge as being Muslim, which is quite something else.
So I think that it is a common predicament, and I think we have much to learn from your candor. And perhaps we too need to introspect on ways in which our own traditions are being subverted and diluted. So thank you very much. This will be a break for 20 minutes, if that is possible, for everybody to leave and come back. But we have to have our 2 minutes.
Yes,
You can see how I calibrated, 30 seconds, 2 minutes, so we'll make this 2 minutes. Well, that was a lesson, and despite the external silence, how slow 2 minutes move when you're craving coffee or the restroom.